Hey everyone, welcome back to Playlist Parlay. I've got an exciting episode lined up, but I need your help. We're putting together playlists for some legendary bands and artists: Rush, Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix, Sarah Bareilles, and Aerosmith. As you know, I've got a busy schedule with gigs coming up, and I could really use the community's support. That's where you come in. Join our exclusive Discord channel and help me create the ultimate playlists for these incredible musicians. To get access, simply join our Collaborators Corner tier on Patreon for just $10 a month. Not only will your input make a huge difference, but you'll also get a shout out in each episode as a thank you for your support. Thanks for being part of this amazing journey, and let's get started. Episode 7, The Essential Rush with Don Anderson. Music by Grover Anderson and the Lampaliers. No relation. Hey everybody, welcome back to Playlist Parlay. My guest this week is Don Anderson, who is the guitarist for Zero Gravity, and he plays with Carrie Tweedy. Hey Don, how you doing?
Good. How's it going, Josh?
I'm doing great. You're a guitarist and kind of a gearhead. So tell me about like your gear stuff. I know you buy and sell a lot of stuff. Is it to review and then you like resell what you don't like, or?
Well, there's a term, we call it GAS, Gear Acquisition Syndrome.
Okay.
So I'm on a lot of guitar forums, and that's what guys joke about. They're like, I'm gassing for this or that. And the question comes up, if it wasn't for the internet, would I buy half of this stuff? Well, you probably wouldn't, because you saw, there's some new amp that Friedman put out, or Soldano's got some new amp. And of course, I have to check it out on YouTube.
Sure.
And so, basically when a lot of these pieces are pretty high end, high dollar stuff, if I want to buy something else, I try to be responsible and be like, okay, well, I'm going to have to sell this. And so that's sort of.
So you don't warehouse thousands of dollars
I don't want
of gear?
if I died, I don't want to leave my wife with all this gear that she's got to sell for the price I told her I bought it for.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Hide the receipts.
Exactly.
Well, cool, man. So you told me that you have a YouTube channel where you review the gear?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah, far from an influencer status, but I get a lot of comments, and there's a lot of guys that appreciate it, because living in a small area like this, I live on YouTube reviews and being able to hear this new amp or this particular gear. But yeah, it's called Kraggin Shred with 2 G's. So Craggin and the word shred, all one word, on YouTube.
Cool. We'll put that in the show notes at the end too, so you get a link back to it. So in this buying and selling of gear, you also inadvertently met my friend Marshall.
Yes.
So tell me about that.
So there's a site called Reverb.com that's pretty much taken over eBay, maybe I don't even know how many years ago, 7, 8 years ago. And they're primarily just gear, and they have lower percentage that they take from the sale. And so buy and sell a lot of stuff there. And primarily all the stuff ends up going to the East Coast, because there's so many more people that live between Florida and Maine and New York and all that. So I sell this piece of gear, and I look to where it gets paid for, look at where I'm shipping it to, and it says Sonora. And so I private messaged the guy, and I'm like, hey, I live in Sonora too. Do you want to meet it? Which was Blockbuster at the time.
Right.
And he says, yeah, no problem. And I'm like, well, I'll refund your shipping. And he was like, don't worry about it, and so it's kind of a funny story.
Yeah, small world.
Yeah.
But we're in a pretty small town, so I guess that makes sense. So how did you get into playing? How did that form for you?
So for me, growing up, I had World War II era parents, and on Sunday night, we were forced to listen to Lawrence Welk show.
Yeah.
After the Disney, I don't remember which was first, but, and it was kind of torture, because here it is, the early 70s, mid 70s, and along comes the electric guitar I have a cousin, Linda, who is getting married. She's older than us, and she had a band at her reception, and it was a rock band. And I just remember going up to the guitar player and just like, oh my God, that's what I want to do. And also what was interesting during that time, the 70s radio didn't have a lot of rock music, a lot of hard rock. It was very soft rock. And so some of the earliest stuff that came on the radio, of course, like Stairway to Heaven or maybe some Bad Company, when I would hear like something with a harder rock edge, I was like, oh my God, I love that sound. I want that, what do I need to do? And so 6th grade, mom and dad cave in and get me a cheap Stratocaster, and we go down. They didn't know anything about anything. And they sell me this amp that only has a clean sound. it actually turns out it was a custom. That was the brand. It was a bass amp, and I didn't know, and they didn't tell me. So after some guitar lessons, I'm like thinking, this doesn't sound anything like AC/DC or Scorpions. What am I missing? You know? So fast forward to the 8th grade, I lay down the guitar. Some friends of mine were playing as well, and they said, you got to get over here. And they had a distortion box, and he knew some AC/DC riffs, and oh my God, my life changed from there. And so then I began, playing in bands by the 9th grade. And
yeah, that's interesting because, we talk about different elements of music and a lot of times I think that people focus a lot on rhythm and notes as being like the main elements of what music is. It's like you got to play the right note at the right time. But it's a real small percentage, tone and dynamics and space, and there's a whole bunch of other elements to music. And so talking about tone is really what kind of brought you in.
Right.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, and some of those recordings, some of the early AC/DC, some of the early Scorpions, all of the Scorpions recordings, and of course Van Halen, Rush, which we'll get to.
Yeah.
These are just, we joke about this tone, this guitar tone being in my DNA. Like I just know what that Marshall sound, it's really post-production sound. A lot of the Marshalls were very harsh in the studio and they would have to doctor them up to make them sound better. And in the production phase.
Sure, round them out a little bit, not so sharp on the...
Exactly, top end.
Yeah, man. So in your quest for gear, is that still kind of what you're chasing is tone? Is it in different things? Is that kind of what that syndrome is about, you think?
Well, yeah, and I joke with my other guitar player friends that I've got the ultimate tone. I've arrived, and they're like, "Yeah, right. You'll sell it
for this week."
Yeah, and I really haven't bought any amps for I think 6 months.
Okay, so you're on the wagon.
Yeah, and I've been using my Fractal more lately, which is it's modeling technology that Metallica, Journey, Def Leppard are 3 huge bands that are still doing arenas. They are not taking amplifiers out with them. And most would agree they don't sound as good if you're a guitar player, but the final product through the PA in the house to 99.9% of the listener, they don't know the difference.
Yeah.
And it's super convenient. So last week we played at Twain Harte Concert on the Pines. I wanted to bring my half stack and I was going to, but it was such a hot day. Yeah. And not one person said, dude, you used your Fractal. It's like people didn't know the difference. And I was inspired. That's the main thing. If I'm inspired by the tone, it's a big part of it.
Does it feel the same to play? Or is there a difference? Like, is it the difference between a different instrument?
Honestly, I use in-ear monitors, and to an extent, the modeler sounds better. They record really well, and in my in-ears, because that's the end result, you've got to separate from standing in front of the amp. Standing in front of a 412 cab and hitting this A chord or some riffs or whatever, it's just, your legs are shaking and it's an amazing experience. But then when you step out at the 100 feet out, you hear the PA, it's like, okay, that's not the same sound. It sounds really good, but, and that's what the Fractal does really well. So to answer your question, does it feel the same? Really close.
Okay.
And close enough, or I wouldn't use it.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you might still use it if the convenience outweighed the sound. But it's good to know for other guitar players that this is an interesting alternative to having a live amp on stage.
I know, like Scott uses a Kemper, so that's a different one. There's Kemper, Line 6, Fractal are kind of the big ones. And I saw his band, he was using that too. So
yeah, he really likes to. The couple times I played with him, even when he came to play some jazz, he was bringing his laptop and running everything, even for like a more jazz kind of tone sound, because he knows that technology and he's kind of pioneering in that technology too. It's really interesting to get away from that stage sound. As a drummer, I really appreciate it because guitarists, as a general rule, play loud. And I think the reason for that is that they need to be able to hear themselves cleanly on stage, which means their amp has to be cutting through all the lower end stuff so they can hear themselves cleanly.
Right.
And if they're not going through the mains, if you're playing more of a house, like bar band or something like that, and you're not going through the mains, it needs to be audible at the back of the room, which means that the source needs to be loud.
Right.
And that's super obnoxious as a drummer when you can't hear the bass player. The bass player gets muddy because the guitar amps are so loud. And it's just that struggle of, can everybody hear? But but you don't want the guitarist to get lost. You want that they're your soloists. They're, a huge part of the overall sound, and they're a good performer. People like to look and watch them take the solos and feel that happen much more than the bass and the drums. They're just holding down that bottom end.
Right.
So from a stage sound perspective, it's really cool that we've gotten away from having to have this loud thing on stage and everybody gets to hear better, which tightens up a band.
Absolutely. Do you use in-ear monitors at all?
I do sometimes. It depends on the gig. If we know we're gonna have full monitors and house sound, then yeah, we do. If we're just going out of amps, then I don't. I just rely on the stage sound.
Yeah.
I don't like to rely on them too much. I find myself getting lost in them sometimes because the sound is so good that sometimes, I don't know, I feel like I'm a quarterback when I'm drumming. And when things start to go sideways, it's like I got to call the audible. I don't want the front person to have to turn their back to an audience and deal with a kerfuffle on stage. So I kind of take that role in a lot of the bands. And so if I do use in-ears, I actually only use one, and I leave my other ear open so I can hear reality too.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I usually will do it. But yeah, I like them. And especially if we're not using stage amps, then you need to, basically. I don't want to have a wedge monitor.
Right.
That's almost defeats the purpose.
My previous band's drummer was so loud, and on the ride, he would get on the bell of the ride and he's breaking sticks loud. Seriously. And he has one dynamic, loud. And I had to start using them because I was coming home, my ears were ringing, and I'm just like, I just don't want to damage too much. I know I've damaged some of my hearing, but it's
I don't think any of us do this without having some damage. Even if you're really careful at a young age, if you've got good guidance and at 16 they're saying, no, you need to protect your ears, I still think by the time you're 45 you're going to have done something.
Sure.
I've been pretty good. I get a little bit of tinnitus, but mine isn't ringing. Mine is like a bad speaker cable, and it just and then just cuts out. And I'll have like a 3 or 4 second deaf moment.
Yeah.
Usually in my left ear. And then it just kind of comes back on, and I hope it always comes back on. But you never know.
Well, you certainly don't get it back. My mom, before she passed, she had such bad hearing, and it was I'm just like, I do not want to end up that way. And
well, it's a career ender too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ironic that the thing that we do and we love to do on the weekends has an inherent danger, and a lot of younger people just they want to go and be loud and have all this energy, and
yeah.
And then sometimes the hearing protection, if you're not using in-ears, but you're just actually using muffs or the little wads to shove in your ear canals, you don't hear as good. It's hard to play well when you...
I used those for years, and I'm like, why I'm spending all this money to have the tone I want, and here I'm shoving foam in my ears. And so that's where I finally just got used to using the in-ears, and I can do a full gig, come home, and my ears are not ringing at all.
Yeah, and it really is the future. I would expect that, it's really one of the almost essential pieces now. I mean, if you're playing a smaller room, I don't think so much. But if you're really having to play to an outdoor audience or a room that holds more than 100 people, yeah, you probably just in-ears are the way to go. You get much better sound. It's easier to stay clean and stay tight and sound good. The only problem that I've had with them is, and the reason I always leave one ear open, is because sometimes when you've got them in, there's some weird live sound that you're not hearing because the in-ears are blocking it out.
Yeah.
So I always leave one ear open to just kind of troubleshoot. But and it also is for me. It also has to do with the drums being mic'd. Like miking drums is kind of a weird thing too. In a medium-sized room, you might do kick and snare, but not the overhead. So all of a sudden you're playing with in-ears on, and it's all bass drum and kick drum and snare drum, and your cymbals and toms are kind of lost, and that's it feels weird to play if you don't have the overheads kind of mic and everything. So that's another reason I like to leave one out, so I can still hear the drums acoustically, but hear everything else basically only in mono, though. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about your band history. You came up here in what year?
2002, came
Okay.
up from Fresno, where I grew up, and was dating my wife, Ann, and then we got married, and I was doing a lot of rock climbing, which I still do, and skiing. And then when I came up, I was really involved with the local church, Calvary Chapel, that's right down the street, and so I was playing with their worship team, which I had done some of that, the worship type music, played mandolin with them as well as acoustic and electric guitar. I did that for about 10 years and then just decided I wanted to take a break and have a studio. So my goal was to get a drum set that was in there, and I was jamming with some guys. It wasn't even really a band, just jamming. And this guy takes off and moves to Maui, so he sells me his Gretsch drum set, and then another bass player sells me his Ampeg stack. So now I'm set. I have a PA. And then eventually started Hired Gun, and the real catalyst to get us out and playing was having a singer that was proficient but not great. And so we started gigging, and that was the first band. Then over the years, things, each member, we basically upgraded, so to speak, with different bass player, different drummer. And then Jim McDonald, when he came in, the band kind of hit its stride, and he's the current singer, very good. And
Okay.
so,
And then at some point you had moved on from Hired Gun and took some time off again and focused on rock climbing. And you're kind of an outdoor adventure enthusiast. You do, downhill biking and skiing and climbing and whatever.
those are the main things. Yeah, I water skied, kind of tournament style water skiing for years, and then got more back into snow skiing. But yeah, big enthusiast with mountain biking, which we have so much up here near Pinecrest and Dodge Ridge, and then rock climbing. But as far as the interim, I didn't even play my last gig with Hired Gun before Lauren had reached out to me, is what happened. So there was a little bit of a break, a couple months, and then we started rehearsing. And at first I was like, I want a little break. But then I started thinking about, the opportunity. And at my age, I'm like, how many opportunities am I going to have? And I had so many experiences with just people you wouldn't choose to hang out with. And then the kind of the different personalities, we'll call it. And I knew these were stand-up folks and good music, great musicians. And so I couldn't pass it up. Yeah.
Band work is a tricky thing. There's a lot of personalities and opinions and we all know that the fair thing to do is to make them a democracy, but when everyone, when there's 4 or 5 folks and they all vote differently, who wins? Is it just a stalemate and we just don't play a gig
Right.
And I've been in those situations too, and it's very frustrating. And I've found that bands work better with a dictatorship. They just do. And part of being professional is to back off and let the dictator be the dictator.
Sure.
And if you just can't hang anymore, it's time to move on. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Try to just move on as peacefully as you can. But I'm a big fan of the benevolent dictator in a band situation. And the democracy stuff has always been far more frustrating and leads to, less getting accomplished.
Right.
In my experience, anyway. So shout out to Grover for being a benevolent dictator.
Nice.
So then you moved on to Zero Gravity.
Yes.
And you're playing with, I said it on Carrie's episode, Dan's one of my favorite bass players up here. And then Carrie's a fantastic vocalist and was a great guest. And then you and Lauren Kaiser.
Yep.
And, and so you and Lauren also both kind of share the gear mongering.
Oh, yeah.
He's also he's a drum guy. Does he do a lot of like electronic stuff with drums too, or is he just sort of an acoustic?
He has, what do you call the samplers, where you can hit, like there's a snare hit that sounds like a garbage can lid at the beginning of Summer 69. Like he has a trigger. That's what it is, right? And
sure,
yeah. Trigger.
Digital triggers, yeah.
He has that, not a ton, and then he has a particular real snare for the reggae song we do, and that's not triggered. I forget what else. He has something else. Oh, there's claps, like clap, in a song.
Hand claps.
Yeah.
That's cool. And he incorporates all that. He brings that stuff live. That's really neat.
Most of the time, yeah, depending on the venue.
Yeah, and the temperature.
Exactly. How much gear do I want to set up?
Yeah. That's really cool. I told this story on Carrie's episode that Lauren really hooked one of my drum students up with a really, really nice kit. And that was, I still just real sweet of him to let that happen, because he probably could have made double the money on that kit. And he didn't go for that. He let the young man have a really, really fantastic piece of gear.
That's super cool.
Yeah, he's a nice guy. And I ran into all you guys, I don't know, probably about 4 or 5 months ago at the pizza joint. You guys had just had a rehearsal, and I was going in to pick up a pizza, and it was nice to run into everybody together, and friendly group of folks. And I'm really glad that you guys are out there doing stuff and have a personnel lineup that everyone really seems happy with. And that's, helps make good music.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
All right. So we're going to talk about Rush today. And it's interesting to me because it's happening so close to the Police, and the similarities between Rush and the Police are a lot. There's a lot of really stark similarities. They're they both have the forgotten third member is the guitarist,
right? Which
is interesting to me because you're, as a guitarist, this is the band you're bringing in, and Alex, I think, is overshadowed by Geddy Lee and Neil Peart.
Absolutely.
Which is really a weird thing to say, because Alex Lifeson is a fantastic guitarist.
Yeah.
World class, but to be overshadowed by the other two members too is mind blowing. Neil is almost on every magazine or publisher's list of the top drummers of all time. He's usually number one, and on some lists, I've never seen him less than number 5, even on a list that's kind of making some different kinds of claims about what it means to be a fantastic drummer. And he is. He's monstrously creative, but then just really understands a melodic approach to playing drums. He uses his toms in a way that's not just rudiment and rhythm. There's a lot of tone that he's going after to create incredible solos and incredibly orchestrated drum parts that I don't know that anyone else really has ever done. As much as I like Carter Beauford and as much as I like Stuart Copeland, there's an element of tonal approach that I don't know that anyone else has really done like Neil. And then Geddy Lee is, this, if there's aliens walking among us, he's probably one of them. It's unreal how his bass playing, along with all the synth playing on top of being the lead vocalist, and he does it live. You want to expand on what your thoughts of these guys are?
Yeah, I mean, it's been said about Alex Lifeson, the guitarist, that he plays maybe not the flashiest solo or the flashiest riffs, but they're the right parts. It's been said that, and I really appreciate that. The older I get is understanding you don't have to play, like Yngwie Malmsteen, or, you shouldn't if it doesn't call for it. Most people aren't going to. But Alex really, I think he's comfortable with who he was. He knew what the song called for. And, just an absolute monster player, but not necessarily your top 10 technical virtuoso, even though he did play a lot of technical stuff. And Geddy, you summed it up really well. His tone, that's something else too. It's such a huge sound. For most of the songs that I'm going to pick anyways, that era was the Rickenbacker bass. I don't even know what he played into. But when I saw them live, it was the first concert I ever went to in 1981, was Moving Pictures Tour, which I will talk about later, but that's to me their pinnacle of where they peaked. But I remember walking out of there, I was in the 8th grade, and just thinking, these guys make so much sound for 3 guys, you know? And a lot of that was the bass. It was the bass with the drums and then the guitar hitting a big power chord or whatever. And then, of course, all the riffs. And then to me, drumming-wise, between Neil and John Bonham, those are like the two, and they're obviously very different drummers. But, even Jeff Porcaro from Toto, he stole the beginning of, was it Rosanna that has a real tricky part at the very beginning?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. He said it was Fool in the Rain. I can't even remember the other he took 3 different parts. Part of it, I think, was the Purdy Shuffle, "Fool in the Rain" from
Right.
Zeppelin, and
Well,
something
"Fool in
else.
the Rain" really is like the first halftime shuffle groove,
Okay.
really, but they kind of call the halftime shuffle from Rosanna.
Okay.
But yeah, "Fool in the Rain," yeah, was a precursor to that idea for sure.
And I would have never picked that out because I'm not a drummer, and but it was interesting. But yeah, so Neil, and such a tragic loss with losing him. Whatever it was, 3, 4, or 5 years ago, I think.
Yeah, it's been a while, but yeah, it's and real tragic story for the end of that guy's life. I mean, he lost a bunch of his family and then got a diagnosis, and
Yeah.
sad stuff for him. But I think it's really interesting that even though Rush isn't on tour anymore, Geddy and Alex are keeping the idea of the band alive by talking about it a lot. They didn't become obscure. He wrote a book that you were talking about earlier, and they do a lot of interviews now. They do a lot of like cracking open the vaults of stories and stuff, and they're both pretty candid about.
Mainly Geddy. I don't see a lot from Alex, and maybe I just don't see it, but yeah, his book, if you haven't read it and you're a Rush fan, it's called My Effin' Life by Geddy Lee, and just phenomenal backstories. And, I've seen every documentary on Rush and specials they've done, and there are so many more stories that they just don't go into on those. And, but yeah, highly recommended read.
Right on. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to get into our lists and start talking about these tunes.
Sounds good.
All right. We'll be right back. All right, and we're back. So we're going to talk about Rush, and we each made our list, and there's a few crossovers, but not as many as I would have expected. It's kind of you've got some deeper cuts that I didn't even know existed, and I'm really excited to hear you talk about them. But I just want to reiterate who the members are. So we're talking about 3 guys. It's always been the same lineup. They never had anyone else in or out. So this is Geddy Lee on lead vocals, synths, bass guitars, piano, and any other weird thing that they ever used. And then Neil Peart, one of the best drum set players ever. I mean, he's really arguably the best, and most lists put him certainly in a top 5. And then Alex Lifeson on guitar, who is a fantastic world-class player, overshadowed by his bandmates to some degree, but fantastic player. All right. So we're going to start. I'm going to go first. Don's going to go second, and that way he gets the last word. And I'm going to start with Jacob's Ladder. And I picked Jacob's Ladder mostly just because it was a different sounding Rush tune. As I was kind of listening through these, it kind of starts with like this march, which is really not something I've heard Neil do in any other Rush cut. Can you think of another one where he's kind of doing a...
I cannot. I will say, as we listened to it earlier, there's some parts that kind of remind me of another song that's on that album, but I think maybe it's just because they may have written it the week after.
Yeah, it could be. And this is an early album or the first album?
This is Permanent Waves. No.
Oh, no, this is later.
This is right before 1980, just before their breakout album, Moving Pictures.
Okay.
So...
Cool. And as it gets deeper into it, there's a lot of weird time signature changes in this one, like a lot of their tunes. They really like to experiment with a lot of drum groove changes. Like he'll do a lot of the same tricks that Stuart Copeland was doing. And this style of drumming works really well in a power trio, where you kind of go between a half-time groove and a double-time groove, and then you've got a section that's in 7/8 or 9/8 or 5/4 or some kind of odd time groove that creates tension. And then when you get back to your chorus, you're going to go back and do something that's more felt in 4, that's more danceable, and that gives you this tension and release dynamic. And that's kind of why I picked Jacob's Ladder to start.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to add for this one that you remember?
It's definitely a song that's very different from all the other songs on Permanent Waves. I had this album on vinyl back in junior high and high school. And as we listened to it earlier, I hadn't listened to it in a long time. The guitar melody was really memorable, and the guitar solo is just really soaring, a lot of really nice bends, and just kind of sticks with you. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, Alex, we were talking a little bit about how his style can be really melodic, as compared to like an Eddie Van Halen style guitarist, which is a much more shredder style. Alex certainly capable of that, and some of his solos really do that. Mm-hmm. But he also has this style where can be really legato and melodic,
absolutely,
and really pretty sounding in what's pretty aggressive music. I mean, Rush is. It's kind of, a lot of people say it's hard rock, but I don't know that hard rock really describes them either. It's Rush is kind of a genre to themselves.
True. Yeah, and at the time they were definitely considered hard rock, but everything has its own subgenre these days,
Sure.
And in the times we live in, we have 17 genres of metal, so
yeah.
So Rush is no longer hard rock.
Yeah, and genres are kind of weird anyway, because you're trying to classify something, and maybe you should just classify it by the band that did it instead of the genre they're in.
There you go.
Maybe that's a better way to do it. So that's my number 10. I enjoyed it. It was something kind of different to listen to from a drumming perspective. So that puts us at your number 10, which is Subdivisions.
Yeah, Subdivision is a song that really stand out to me, a memory that back in the early 80s, MTV used to do a Saturday night. Every Saturday night was a new video premiere.
Okay.
And I think this was 1982 because it was the album after Moving Pictures, which was 81. And we would go over to my buddy's house and there would be some sort of, adult beverages flowing, even though we were still in high school and we were feeling good. And I remember this coming out, and it was so keyboard heavy that at first I was kind of let down. I was like, oh man, where's the guitar, But over time, I liked it a lot more. And, this song really departed from the guitar riff dominant sound that Rush used for years. And like I said, it grew on me. And this was a time when Rush really started coming out with hits. And it's funny, the song is about basically being cast out, and being living basically outside of the cool circle, so to speak. In Geddy's book, he talks about how they were just total guitar and bass nerds, music nerds. And he tells this story that they would steal alcohol from their parents' liquor cabinet, and they would take little bits from each bottle and put it into one concoction. Ooh. And he called it, they called it Panther piss because that's what it tasted like.
Sure.
And the funny thing is, I have a friend, Alan Kohler, I grew up with. We spent a lot of time in junior high, and we used to do the same thing. My parents didn't have hard alcohol. Because his parents, I don't know if your parents did this, but they would mark the booze, where that mark was. And we would take just a little bit out of gin and vodka, and then you'd put it in like a container and then drink it on your school field trip and then go puke behind the building or something. Yeah. But those are the days.
Yeah, I never did it at school. But yeah.
So I had to send
I've been green more than once, though.
When I read that in the book, I had to text my buddy Alan, who lives down in Southern California, and I was like, "You remember doing that?" I was like, "Apparently, it's called Panther piss." We're cracking up.
That's awesome. So in music too, subdivision is an idea where we were just talking about this because we were counting through some of these tunes, and unknowingly, I just talked about this. So when we count something that's in an odd time, we usually subdivide it into smaller groups of 2s and 3s. So when you play something in 7/8, you can group it as 2 groups of 2 and 1 group of 3. So it can be 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1, or 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3, or 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2. And that's called subdividing.
Okay.
So as drummers, we think about this all the time, especially when we're playing in an odd time signature. When we're playing in 4, it's all nice and even, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and so it's just a bunch of groups of 2. But as soon as you add one odd time, one of them has to be a group of 3. And then you can choose where in that time signature that group of 3 is. So you can kind of put it wherever you want. And so, to say something's in 7/8 gives you information, but is it 3/2/2, 2/3/2, or 2/2/3? And that matters a lot to how a drummer approaches making it groove with what everyone else is doing. And a lot of times, like the bass player and the guitar player will think of a riff and a whole line, and they'll do this naturally, but a drummer really has to understand that because it would matter where we put our backbeat. So just a little thing. I bet that as cerebral as Neil is, that this is a play for him on
sure.
that idea, because they do so much work in odd time.
Yeah.
And if I really dug into this, I wonder if he's even changing how he's subdividing different odd time sections in this tune. It wouldn't surprise me that's something he would do.
And the guitar player's over to the side going, I was told there would be no math.
Yeah.
Isn't my guitar tone excellent?
There's always a little bit of math. But yeah, this is a great tune. I'm glad you brought it up. I remember to listen to this one quite a bit. So that puts us at number 9. My number 9 is Time Stands Still. And this is one that I kind of mostly picked for a lyrical reason. I like tunes that are about sort of seize the day. That's a thing I like. We just did a Dave Matthews Band episode, and a lot of my tunes are about, realizing that the one commodity that we really can't increase. You can increase your wealth, you can get plastic surgery and increase your attractiveness and all these other things in life, but nothing you can cheat is time. We never know how much there is left. You don't even know how much is in the bank. Yeah. And songs that are about that really resonate with me, to kind of remind me to, not rewatch a Friends episode and instead go do something more productive.
Yeah.
And, and you're a motivated guy, and you're out climbing and experiencing life the way you want to do it. And songs like this remind me and let me share with other people to don't be so sedentary. Don't be complacent. If you're satisfied with your life, that's cool. I don't want to, judge anything, but if you're not completely satisfied, be active in changing everything about where you're at in your life so that it's more the way you want it to be.
Absolutely. I work in physical therapy, and that's like the number one thing I tell people, because people don't want to go to the gym, and
Sure.
some people are gym rats and they like it, but I'm really not, unless it's raining. But I tell them, find something you enjoy, go outside and do it. Go to Pinecrest, walk around the lake, or walk part of the lake, or do something.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely right about time, and just we call it redeeming the time. Make use of every minute you have, because you won't have it again.
Yeah, and this, maybe even scary part. I mean, I think it's scary, is that it really is. You've got a bank of minutes left, and you can't check your balance.
Yeah,
and that's for some people, I bet that's terrifying. I mean, I think but we all should live with a certain amount of concern about that reality.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man. And so that's kind of why I picked this one. This is what it reminded me of. These are the thoughts I had as I listened to this again. So what about you? You got any thoughts on Time Stands Still?
Yeah, just what we were talking about earlier, how, their sound completely changed. What did we call this? 1986 this came out?
Yeah, I think 86 was this album.
And I believe I saw them the second time I saw them, I've only seen them twice, was at the Forum in Inglewood.
Okay.
And Tommy Shaw opened up for him as a solo artist.
Nice.
And I just remember we were up in the nosebleed section. But great concert, great show. But they really changed their sound. They were really influenced by a lot of the other bands, U2, Police, like you were commenting on earlier, a lot less, more keyboard, but more clean guitar sounds.
Yeah, we were kind of speculating about the change of Rush's sound in sort of the mid 80s. And I don't know this is true, but I was speculating that as the Police kind of ended and Sting started doing the solo career stuff, I think that was 85, 86, and this album came out in 86.
Yeah.
If that was, sort of a behind the scenes in the record industry, that they were trying to get Rush to fill that niche that the Police had left. They had this power trio that was bringing in world music-ish, reggae, more Lebanese kinds of groove through Stewart. But not everyone, there was not really another contemporary band that was doing that. And I wonder if the label or the record, companies were kind of putting a little bit of pressure on Rush to fill that niche when it really wasn't their bag.
It's plausible for sure. I
Yeah.
always look at them as, doing their own thing, kind of marching to their own beat, and it just worked. And they had such a loyal cult following that whatever they put out, worked. But there was definitely a lot more influences in this time period of what was out, what was popular on MTV, and what they liked.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, so Time Stands Still. That's my number 9. So that puts us at your number 9, which is Free Will.
Okay. Yeah, so Free Will is a great song off the album Permanent Waves, and Rush is a band coming off several albums of very long songs. You have Farewell to Kings and Hemispheres, which if you're familiar with those, you've got songs that are anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes long. And in Getty's book, he was talking about how he commented on the side 1 of Hemispheres. The pitch of his vocals were so high, it really just taxed him. And then not just that, but the arrangements were so complex. They started writing songs that we have a couple off of, actually we ended up with, I think, 3 off of Permanent Waves.
Right.
Which was where they really started to write, not necessarily for the radio, I wouldn't say, because this song's, I would guess, still 6 minutes long, I think.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
But I've heard Free Will on the radio. It has gotten radio play.
Sure. But it probably didn't at the time.
That would make sense. Yeah, it wasn't the 2.5 to 3 minute.
In 1980, it was like anything beyond 3 minutes, no thanks.
Yep.
We'll pass. But the song has a great opening riff, like so many of their other ones. You've got these classic punches with Getty and Neil, and then it goes into this memorable riff that he sings along with, and some rather philosophical, lyrics written by Neil, of course. And as I was going through this list, I still to this day don't know what came first. Was it the lyrics that got written too? Because they do fit so well.
Yeah.
That I'm sure it may be a mishmash of sometimes it was the lyrics that were out there and they wrote the music to it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what their process was. And it's notable because we didn't specifically say it, but as in all this thing, Neil, the drummer, who was not a singer at all, was the principal lyricist for this band.
Exactly.
Which is a very unique, weird dynamic in a band situation that the Getty you'd think would be writing those lyrics that he's singing, and it was in fact the drummer who was a non-singer.
So the story was he came in on the first album was a drummer named John Rusty,
right?
And he wanted to play more songs like Bad Company, and the other 2 guys, Alex and Getty, wanted to do more progressive stuff. And then the X factor was John Rusty had diabetes, and the manager said, if you go back on tour, you're gonna die, because they're partying and he just wasn't healthy. And so they parted ways, and in comes Neil. And the joke that I've heard Alex say was they noticed, hey, this guy reads books. He's smart. And so it just was natural that he started writing all their lyrics. And if you look at every Rush song after that first album, it says music, Lee and Lifeson, and lyrics by Pert.
Yeah.
So
some of the lyrics and just the material choice, not just the lyrics themselves, but the source material, the things that Neil decided to engage with lyrically through Getty's singing is really interesting stuff. And might even be a little bit lost because the band is so aggressive and tight musically that I think sometimes the stories might be a little lost in the creativity of the music itself.
Right.
So
here's a lyric from Free Will that's kind of thought-provoking. It says, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. Each of us a cell of awareness, imperfect and incomplete, genetic blends with uncertain ends.
Yeah.
Kind of poetic and thought-provoking. And
yeah, I mean, it just kind of shows the level of excellence at every aspect of what Rush was doing. I think that this is a band that really tried to say what they wanted to say, both musically and lyrically and stylistically at the live shows, and didn't let the record companies own them as much as other bands might have had to. It's a real tricky thing to get big and still be putting out the music you want to be putting out.
Absolutely.
You know, it's a big financial endeavor to put tours together and recording sessions and everything else. Then you get producers and record company execs, and they all want to have their 2 cents into how this product ends up coming out. And I think Rush is probably one of the bands that was able to stay truest to what they wanted to do musically of popular bands that we know. You know, and they were able to pull that off because they were able to have this cult following. They're live. They were selling out arenas in spite of not having radio hits.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that is evident with when we get to 2112. We'll
Sure, yeah.
chat about that.
Anything else on Free Will?
Free Will, the middle part. If you haven't heard the song, check it out. There's a bass part, that the drum and bass breakdown, I would call it. I don't know if Josh has more technical terms on the song structures. Right before the guitar solo starts. Mm-hmm. And I was in a band in high school, and we would try to play it. And we had a drummer who could play very close to it, but that bass solo, the bassist, he was in over his head on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that, you know, other people, other musicians that would be on a top 10 list as bassists or drummers or guitarists would be challenged to recreate what any of these other 3 guys are doing. I think, you know, the best in the world other players would find any Neil Peart song challenging, and any Geddy Lee performance, well, nearly impossible. I mean, you know, just the vocal range and the fact that he was swapping instruments mid-song regularly.
Yeah.
And then not cheating at it either. He wasn't like making it look like he was doing it in MIDI tracks. I mean, there's live performances where he's making small errors and you can hear him and he doesn't hide them. He's showing you that he's really doing it. And I don't know, it's just a level of excellence that I don't know many other bands that could ever did it.
I would venture to say there's more drummers that have tried to mimic Neil Peart than there are bass players that have tried to mimic exactly what Geddy's doing.
Yeah. Well,
not only on their songs, but, you know, like not just covering their songs, but I think there's guys like Mike Portnoy who would say Neil Peart's like probably his number one influence.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about the history of Dream Theater. Do you think that that's a direct child of Rush, or were they kind of happening at the same time?
I mean, they're like a cross to me between Rush meets Queensryche meets Metallica, you know, I mean, and I'm sure there's other influences too, but as far as the progressive side, I would venture to guess Rush is up there, you know, as far as an influence on a lot of their progressive compositions.
Yeah. All right. So that's Free Will. That puts me at my number 8, which is, I don't know if I'm going to say the word right. Is it Barchetta?
Red Barchetta. Yeah.
So what's a Barchetta?
It was a car, apparently. So if you listen to the lyrics, it was his uncle had this car. I don't remember all the details, but it's Canadian built. It certainly
I don't know.
Doesn't ring a bell like Toyota.
So this is another one that I kind of picked mostly lyrically, because Neil was an avid motorcyclist, and there's a sad component to this, and I'll let you tell the sadder story because I want to make sure, because you know it better than I do. But I know that even before that, he would do long, epic, 100-mile bike rides all through Canada. He was, you know, when they weren't on tour, his pastime was to go get on his bike and ride. And this is not directly about motorcycle riding, but the idea of what it means to just go take a drive and the ability to do that. And so it's interesting from that perspective to me. But tell a little bit about, you know, the tragedy of Neil, if you don't mind.
So I can't remember the year, but it had to have been, I want to say around 2007, maybe. No, maybe it was quite a bit earlier than that.
I don't know. But
they came off tour. His daughter was going off to college, and she had just learned to drive, and I think she had a Jeep, and she was gone for a couple hours, and they get a call that she was in a wreck, and she passed away. And the wife had, I can't remember his wife's name, but she had been sick and ended up with I can't remember the type of cancer. It might have been breast cancer. So within a year, he loses his daughter and his wife.
Yeah.
And just tells the band, hey guys, I need some time away. He gets on his motorcycle, takes off, just puts a helmet on, you know, when he shows up at the hotels and restaurants along the way down to the southern tip of Argentina. He said nobody recognized him the whole trip, and he just, you know, wanted to be a ghost. And so that he wrote that book, Ghost Rider, later on, talking about that and his experiences. And the guys in the band were just like, hey, take as much time as you need. And they were at one point thinking, we're never going to tour again. We're never going to play live again. But thankfully they did.
Yeah. And then Neil, I don't know the time frame, but ultimately cancer got him too.
Yeah.
And I kind of remember reading that he had the diagnosis before he retired. He just kind of played until he was too weak to be Neil Peart anymore. Like he just started to not be able to physically execute the excellence of his performance. Yeah. And once he realized that it was too physically demanding, that's when the band retired, and then he passed away about 2 years after.
Yeah, there's an interview you can see, or probably a couple of them on YouTube, where he says, it hurts to hit the drums. They don't hit, you know, they don't move when you hit them.
The way he plays them, they hit back.
Yeah, I guess, you know, but he was just saying between arthritis. And I had not heard, and I don't remember Geddy talking about it in his book, that he knew and still played live. I always thought it was afterwards, but it was a relatively short period of time between them.
I'm pretty sure that he might not have shared it with them.
Oh, that's true.
I don't know.
That's
I
true.
don't.
It was definitely quiet. I mean, when he passed away, my buddy Ray Settle down in Fresno, he called me or texted me, and he's like, Neil Peart died. I'm like, what are you talking about? They definitely kept it close.
Yeah.
And Neil wanted it that way.
Yeah. With that amount of loss in your life, I mean, I can only imagine what his perspective was, to lose kind of everything in such a short amount of time. And basically the band's what you have left. And then, you know, and just, even if you didn't get sick, just aging.
Yeah.
You know, there's a point, there's an expiration date that's hopefully shorter than my life. I'd like that at some point I get to retire from playing and do something else too.
Yeah.
But I think like a lot of things, just driving and not having to wear glasses and things like that. As we age, it's a challenging thing for us to kind of cope with sometimes, and it's just really sad. And what an amazing player, and it's real sad that he had to experience such a very hard year.
Yeah.
So that was my number 7. No,
8.
So your number 8, according to my notes, is Spirit of Radio.
Spirit of Radio is on Permanent Waves from 1980. It's the opening track. And during the 80s, many stars of the previous decade denounced current state of the music industry. There was Billy Joel's Still Rock and Roll to Me, Bob Seger's Old Time Rock and Roll, and the Ramones' Do You Remember Rock and Roll Radio? Rush's Spirit of Radio attacked the modern radio for the glittering prizes and endless compromises that shatter the illusion of integrity. Ironically, radio embraced the song and turned it into a huge hit. So I just I pulled that up from Google earlier, which I thought was kind of cool. I never really thought of it that way. But as far as the song, the guitar part, it's supposed to sound like a static wave of, airwave crackling.
Sure.
And in the 9th grade, I learned how to play it, and I played it in a band for my junior high school group in front of about 800 people, which was kind of cool.
Yeah,
at the time I used a wah-wah pedal, but I think he was using either a chorus or a flanger. But it's just a really cool riff. And if you're familiar with it, the beginning, da-da-da-da-da-da, and there's a bass part that goes literally, but I mean the notes are so articulate. He does it perfectly with the drums.
Yeah.
And even though it is more of a radio-oriented song, it is just a masterpiece. Love the song. Earlier, I was talking to Josh about how a lot of these songs I probably wouldn't put on to listen to, but if this came on the radio, this is one of the ones I would turn up again and listen to it through, because it's just melodic. It's got great riffs. It's got that weird reggae part in it that's kind of a cool change.
That, to me, that's kind of the standout, is that reggae infused. Yeah. It's like a halftime I mean, the reggae part's weird too, but like it's not just a halftime; it's like a complete tempo change,
Right.
and it just sits in that pocket so quickly that it's like, wow, that's
And
you
then
know,
exits right back into one of the
dun,
theme
dun, dun,
riffs.
dun.
Yeah.
It almost ramps up. It almost kind of
Yeah.
has a wind up toy out of it.
Right.
You know, it's like it doesn't just go right back to the original tempo. It's like it's a little bit of a curve
Yeah.
to get back in.
It's
and-
perfect.
Yeah.
It grabs your ear, stuff like that. That's what a lot of these songs, they have these kind of, emotional, so to speak, changes. And lyrically, I was going to comment, the very first lyric is begin the day with a friendly voice, a companion unobtrusive. And he's talking about the radio, and the DJ. And in the 80s, while in high school, I worked at a gas station, and everything we found out about came from the radio. I mean,
Yeah.
we learned about the concerts, we learned about whatever was going on, the new music debuted on the radio. And this is with MTV, but you can't always have MTV on, and we certainly didn't have smartphones or Google or
Right.
YouTube. And just
It's a different world, man.
Yeah.
You know, in our lifetimes I go back to this all the time about how, as a boy, I really remember record stores and how important they were culturally. That, you go to your local record store, and this is even before record stores turned like corporate, borders where they're all the same. I mean, in San Jose where I was growing up, they were still independent mom and pop shops that got them in, and a new album would drop and everyone was there and you'd see these people. It's kind of like when a new movie comes out now on opening night and you see the other movie nerds,
Right.
or a new video game comes out and the people will camp out at midnight at GameStop to get it.
Yeah.
Like we have these things that are culturally similar, but not for records anymore.
Did you guys have Tower Records?
No, I don't remember there being a Tower Records.
There's
down
actually
there.
a documentary on Tower Records. I don't think I've seen it, but there was one in San Francisco and all over. But yeah, and you would go and you would look. I remember as a kid, I didn't have any money in my pocket, as a little kid. And you're looking at these album covers, and you could hold the album and look at the pictures and
Yeah.
read and if you bought it, then read the liner notes, and the lyrics were always in them. And I wish I had more vinyl from that era, but by high school, cassettes were popular when I was in high school. And so it was so much more convenient to be able to pop a cassette in and listen to, whatever you wanted to listen to.
Well, we spent so much time in our cars that
Exactly.
vinyl was just impractical.
Right.
I'm at the cassette to CD crossover.
Yeah.
And I've got, God, I never got rid of my CDs. I've just got shoe boxes that are just full of, the CDs.
Remember,
I
it was a
listened
big deal when you had like the 8 CD loader, so I can flip from CD to CD. And now
Yeah.
it's like you just scroll through your Spotify or whatever.
Exactly. Now it's all just streaming or, locally downloaded. And yeah, it's technology changes, and it has a big influence on things outside of technology. I think the music industry is forever changed because an album doesn't matter as much anymore. People pick, the 2 or 3 hits on the album, and people buy the songs a la carte on Apple if they buy it
Right.
at all, or they just pay to subscribe. And
Yeah, that's what I do. I just pay a monthly amount to Apple Music. And
yeah. But the dynamics of that have really influenced how bands make money. It
Right.
used to be that touring was a function to sell records, and now records are a way to promote a tour.
yeah,
Bands, like the individual players, make much more money from touring now than album sales because the record industry's changed so much. And so now it's like they flipped what the role is.
right. And the whole meet and greet, they're like, oh, you can pay an extra $200 and get 12 seconds of the guy's time.
Right,
Get an
get a photo.
autograph. Yeah, I did that once, and I'm like, never again.
Yeah. But, these tours are expensive to put
Yeah,
together.
absolutely.
And to have quality sound and quality crew and
Yeah.
get all the gear from one city to the next, it's a very expensive endeavor. And when people are, what do you make? 1/10 of a penny per stream per song on Spotify?
Wow.
When you're a big act, it adds up. I'm sure those guys are getting, substantial checks, but, I don't think that most people that are doing this, that are, trying to promote their own music, I'd have to ask Grover, but I doubt it's anything significant at the end of the year, So yeah, big difference. And Spirit of Radio, it kind of talks to that idea a bit too of, how it was at the time, and there's a big shift now. So we get to my number 7, and it's one we already talked about. That's where I've got Free Will, for a lot of the same reasons. It's lyrically interesting. It's certainly a longer radio hit. I don't have a lot more to add to it. And so I'm happy to move on unless you have something more you want to say. So then your number 8 is a song that I had never even paid any attention to at all, The Trees. So tell me how this gets on your list, please.
So this was a standout song on the album Hemispheres. And Hemispheres was the album after 2112. And they were still doing these long progressive compositions. Starts with an acoustic flamingo style that builds into basically a power chord, kind of, just a song that grabs my attention. I really liked it because it's progressive, and it's got the part in the middle where it drops out and Alex is playing this kind of arpeggiated clean part. But building up to that, just great lyrics. He's talking about how the oaks and the maple trees are, fighting amongst each other because one of them's blocking the sun. And someone I read on a forum said that it has some sort of political implications, but I was too stoned at the time to figure that out. and then never since then thought too much into it. It's just a great song. But another one of those that, like I said, in the middle drops out. Do you remember listening to it where he's doing, I think they're called timpani blocks or something, where Neil's doing these really cool percussion things?
So, I think they're just like wood blocks. Yeah. Yeah, and Neil's rig, I guess we could talk about his stage rig. He would set up this octagonal drum riser, and there was so much stuff on it that he didn't use tripods. Most drummers have this gear and they put a tripod down, and his screwed in because there wasn't enough room for everything on it if they had a tripod base. So he had this riser where all the drum hardware literally was screwed into the riser itself, and it was a 360-degree drum kit. And then it would rotate so that when he would have to spin to play the back stuff, his back wasn't to the audience.
Okay.
And he used, very much like what's right here in my room, a set of Roland V drums sort of on the backside to get all those different triggered sounds and effects. But he also would have a marimba and other mallet percussion stuff around his drum set. And by mallet percussion, I mean things that are like a piano. So they're set up very much like how a piano keyboard would be, but you hit them with sticks or mallets. And he would play a lot of tonal pitched instrument stuff too, especially in his drum solos. So yeah, he had, I don't know exactly which of all these instruments he was using, or if it was even a digital reproduction. But he was not afraid to have every percussion toy imaginable on that rig. And he's just monstrous player, monstrously creative. There's a saying that, less is more in drumming, and the more drums you have, the less creative you get because you start drowning an opportunity. So the bigger your kit gets, the more you just go all the time,
right.
Because you just have all this stuff to hit and play with. And Neil was able to really have a bunch of opportunity to make different sounds and use them musically and creative without just turning into, let's just hit it all.
Right.
And Portnoy, I think, is sort of the counter to that. I don't want to sound like I'm saying something negative about Portnoy, but I think Portnoy was much more of a let's use a lot of linear style drumming and make all these different sounds work in an interesting way without a lot of space. And I think Neil was able to do it while still incorporating space, where Portnoy did it with a much more aggressive chop kind of thing. Another one that's kind of like that, I think, is Danny Carey. Danny Carey and Mike Portnoy have a similar drumming approach to having bigger kits, where Neil's, I still think, had enough maybe jazz influence at the front end of his career to let it breathe a little more. And that's a really hard thing to do, because drums don't need to breathe, but to be aware of your own breathing as you're playing. And just like this, and when I edit these at the end, I hear my own breath sometimes like, man, do I want to edit that out? Like, no, that's part of what we're used to hearing. It's organic. And drums sounding more organic, even though they don't have to. It's a similar thing with like guitar, where you don't need to take a space to breathe, but sometimes that breath, that implied breath in a melodic phrase sells it, because it sounds more organic. It sounds more human. And
yeah. So as a whole, The Trees is a great Rush song. It's kind of a deep cut. And if you haven't heard it, definitely check out that middle section as well. Is a great example of what Josh was just talking about, of being a kind of a connoisseur to selectively pull and not overplay, or, really, really neat.
Yeah, right on.
Tune.
So my number 6 is Limelight. And I think I'm going to defer to you, because I know this is going to be a crossover and you've just got it higher on the list, but as the expert, I think that I'd rather have you kind of talk about Limelight, because it's important to you.
Yeah, Limelight has that signature opening riff. It would probably be one of their more, if we wanted to call it, radio-oriented, but yet it's totally not radio-oriented, right? Because how many different time changes are there in it? And just a wonderful opening riff. It goes into the cool, the verse chord progression, and then it goes to the different time signature for the chorus, and then goes through it again. And then what's really spectacular about the song is a solo break, how it builds. Yeah. And then Alex does this whammy bar drop, and then he kind of slowly, they build it. And I've played this song with a band. In fact, Hired Gun, the first version of Hired Gun, played this at Black Oak Casino, and I'm willing to bet we're probably the only band that's ever played Limelight by Rush at the casino.
Yeah. Challenging piece, for sure.
But did we do it perfect? Nope. Because coming out of the solo, listen to the how he does this spillover. A spillover is when you hit a note and hit a delay effect and allow it to ring while I go back into this really cool arpeggiated chorus part.
Okay.
And the note's still ringing. But the way the bass and the drums and everything kind of crescendos coming out of the solo, it's very difficult to execute. But they do it perfectly. It's just a spectacular song.
Yeah, Limelight's really interesting because it does a lot of the same trick that the Police do. And I'm pretty sure we didn't talk about this on air. We talked about this off, right? I'm not repeating myself. So the idea is that you do a lot of groove changes to separate the different sections of a song. So in a song, usually we have 3 main sections that you want to learn about. You've got verses, you've got choruses, and then you've got a bridge. And then you've got other elements of songs like solo sections, which could be over a verse, or they could be over the changes of a chorus, or they could be their own thing. And a bridge is usually what kind of ties a chorus back to a verse. So there's these different sections and elements. And the Police and Rush both like to have the drumming parts be different for every single one of these. And in Rush in particular, they like to use odd time signatures in the verses, which kind of creates tension. When you've got something that's not square, like we were talking about in subdivisions, 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3. It's like it doesn't quite even up. You can't dance to it. It's hard to put that little shuffle step in it. But then you get this release when you get to the chorus again. It's like back to boom, boom. And it's nice and round and even. And then the bridge will do yet another different thing. And Neil liked a lot to do like halftime bridges. So now he's, instead of hitting the snare drum on 2 and 4, he's only hitting it on 3. So what that does to the ear is you got a bass drum on 1 and 3 and then snare drum on 2 and 4. And then in the bridge, he'll do bass drum on 1 and a snare drum only on 3. Which makes it seem like it's slowed down by 50% when the tempo really hasn't, but it feels that way.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of like the tricks of what they're doing is these odd time verses, squared up 4/4 choruses, and then halftime bridges. And even though that element is true for a lot of Rush songs and it sounds formulaic, he's such an incredible drummer that it doesn't feel or sound that way at all.
Yeah.
But he is doing that formula with a very high level of execution.
it keeps the listener's ear constantly engaged. I mean, for me, and I think so many other diehard Rush fans would agree that it just captivates you. I mean, other than the Police, what other bands can you really compare to them? You know, I mean, you can find some progressive bands. Of course, there's a lot of progressive metal and stuff like that now, but at the time, it was just like, what am I hearing? You know, it was just amazing.
Yeah, and you know, their big awareness of Rush was in '81 with Moving Pictures. But how long had they been at it at that point? When was the first record? Do you recall?
I think it was 73 or 4, something like that.
Yeah, so pretty long career of doing stuff and right around Toronto area, right? So they're an Ontario band.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, super good band, and that's Limelight. So your next tune is Bastille Day.
Yes.
It's just Bastille.
So the lyrics are about the French Revolution.
Okay.
And for me, this song goes back to the first time I ever heard Rush. My older brother David had an 8-track. You probably don't remember 8 tracks.
I remember what they are.
So they did a live album. I believe it was after 2112 came out. And this was on there. And I just remember hearing this. It's just got a great opening riff, really aggressive. And I went back and listened to it today. And what struck me, too, was how little distortion Alex used at the time. And I don't know if that was because the Marshall amps didn't have a lot of distortion, or maybe, you know, historically guys will put an overdrive just to push the Marshall amp into a little more saturation. Right. Maybe he wasn't doing that. It was a little bit like an old AC/DC kind of tone. But it just resonates with me because of the age, like, you know, junior high, just learning to play guitar, but he teaches me the riff. It's not that hard. It's pretty active and aggressive kind of sounding song, but it just, you know, I have history with it to the early memories of having heard Rush. And what we used to do, we would skip church and go out to my parents' car. They had a Chrysler LeBaron, which was a big step up from the Volkswagen Bug we had before that.
Right.
And it had an 8-track player, and we'd go out there and we would listen to this 8-track. And again, there wasn't hardly any rock or hard rock on the radio at the time, so we just ate it up, loved it, and this song kind of stands out from that album for me.
Nice. I don't have a lot of experience with this one and don't have a lot more to add, but man, it's a good cut, like, you know, almost everything else. All right. So that puts us at my number 5, which is Spirit of Radio, and we've kind of talked about this one a lot, the messages and the lyric stuff. I don't think we need to revisit it. So your number 5 is Natural Science.
Well, Natural Science, this is just, it has this part that goes from the acoustic into this really musical, melodic guitar riff, and then the drums come slamming in. You can comment on that in a sec. I let you listen to that earlier.
Yeah.
It's definitely a deep cut, but one of my favorites. We used to play it in high school with this drummer, Jamie Watson, who could play the drums perfectly, and Tim Kroniak, he was a bass player that could play these parts too. It was just super fun. And my buddy Mike Phillips, who has currently right now, they have a Rush tribute band that plays big shows down there. But just a great song. There's a bunch of time signature changes, all this just classic Rush stuff. This was not an instrumental. Geddy sings on it.
Yeah.
And just one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's a good tune. Neil comes in, you know, powerful. I don't know the tune enough to like get specific about the drums, but it is. It's got a long intro, and then when the drums come in, it's a very dynamic shift, and that's a lot of what they do. You know, is to use the elements of everybody to create these sort of surprise 90-degree turns musically. That's exciting.
Yeah,
it's an exciting band to listen to. All right, so my number 4 is YYZ. And YYZ is the airport code for Toronto International. So as these guys started touring and were flying back home, because that's where they all were kind of from. I don't know if they're from Toronto specifically.
I believe they are, yeah. They were, yeah.
But so that's the code. And I can appreciate that this cut is not for everybody. This is an instrumental, and it's aggressive, almost maybe even obnoxious. In how in your face this intro can be, but it's super interesting to me because of the space. It's got a lot of these really tight figures that all three of them are playing together after a significant amount of silence. And to execute that live means that you have to count and understand how long the spaces are, how long to rest for, so that you come in exactly together. It's not like they're, doing a stage huddle where they hit the last thing and then they all look at each other and one of them's cueing it. It's all very well, very specifically written, and they all understand what they're doing on a very technical level. And so to me, that's why this tune is super interesting. And then it just meanders through all kinds of different grooves and everything with no lyrics. And it's got some reggae stuff in it. It's got a lot of hard rock stuff. It's got a lot of just super tight syncopated stuff. But with no lyrics in it and no story, I can appreciate why this may not ultimately make the list. But as a drummer and as a Neil Peart fan, this is one of the most interesting musical things they have going on.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's up there for sure, and I've always enjoyed it on their classic Moving Pictures album.
Yeah. All right. So your number 4 is La Villa. How do you say it?
Strangigato.
Strangigato.
Do not ask me what that means. In fact, when you spell it, Google can't even correct it. So I don't know if they made it up or what. On the album cover, after the title, it says, "An exercise in self-indulgence." That's what they call it. So this song is on Hemispheres, and this was an album I had on vinyl in high school, and I would literally go to bed at night and put my headphones on, and one night I would listen to side A, and the next night I'd listen to side B. Mm-hmm. And I'd tell you how many times my mom would come in at 3 a.m, and the headphones are on the floor, and the album's going roop, 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 like that, and she's like, "Turn that off." But this is just another one of these, 13, 14-minute pieces that starts real mellow, comes in with this classic riff, and then is kind of all over the place. It's an instrumental. To me, a little more melodic and listenable than the YYZ, and would certainly be interesting for a drummer too. But then has this like soundscape in the middle where there's harmonics and then it comes out of it with drum punches and just fills and builds and just creates this everything you were talking about earlier that just captures your ear and just complete favorite. So at one point we tried in Hired Gun, we did an instrumental version of this up to the middle part, and then we were like, there was all these crazy bass lines and stuff. We were just like, let's make a medley and go into, I think we went into Red Barchetta or something else. There is no easy Rush song, but we kind of took Exit Stage Left on the middle part of this. And but yeah, if you haven't heard it, check it out. It's a good one.
Yeah, right on. All right. My number 3 then is Fly By Night. And this one, the nerd part of me loves this one because this is inspired by Lord of the Rings. This is sort of the story of Sam and Frodo escaping the Shire with the Nazgul chasing them, and it's kind of a little bit silly and goofy, little nerdy, but that's who Neil was. As much as of a, people like his nickname is the Professor, and. Part of it's because he's very well read. He was an intelligent guy and just a master at his craft, both as a drummer but also as a lyricist. And I think this really showcases like him able to take his literary pleasures and turn it into a Rush song, which is no easy feat. And so it's interesting and cute, kind of in a I don't know if cute's a fair word, but it is a little bit cute that to take something that's I don't think would normally be associated with a prog rock band, being Lord of the Rings. But it works, and it's one of my favorite tunes.
I'll never forget, this was a early Rush song, I think on their second album, I believe.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, that I remember hearing it, and I was amazed as a very young guitarist. I'm like, wow, I can actually play that. It was just a couple of chords, really catchy little riff, and it was almost kind of a radio-oriented kind of song.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely early classic. The other thing that strikes me on this is Geddy's pitch on this was so high.
Yeah, he's way up there.
Crazy.
I'm not, I remember when I first was listening or heard him on the radio, and I don't remember specifically, but I think I was in the car with my dad, and I was talking like, wow, she sings really, really well. I don't remember, it might have been Fly By Night, where I thought the vocalist was a female because his voice is so high that it kind of sounds like a Jefferson Airplane a little bit to me. Like that, I don't know who that female vocalist in Jefferson Airplane is, but it's
Grace Slick, wasn't it?
I don't know for sure. But
yeah,
from a tone wise, I thought they sounded similar to me. And I haven't gone back to really check that. I'm just kind of talking off the cuff here, but I didn't know that Geddy was male, because his voice can do some pretty amazing acrobatics at the high end. But anyway, that's Fly By Night. So your number 3 is Working Man.
Yes. So this is another song that I remember hearing and thinking, wow, that's so heavy, going back to that 8-track that my brother had. And then in comes a buddy named Jimmy Graham, and he shows me how to play it. And I couldn't believe how easy it was at the beginning. It definitely gets into some more progressive, parts as it gets into the like pre-solo part. But the story behind this was interesting. This is off their first album, and it was what launched them, this song, and it was Cleveland. Are you familiar with the story where they thought it was a new Zeppelin album?
Oh, wow.
And so the radio DJ, she explains in one of the Rush documentaries how DJs wanted a longer track so that they could go to the bathroom. And she just started playing it. And this is this working class kind of blue collar, Cleveland crowd that's listening to the station. And they kept just asking for it to play and to play and to play. And so I don't know if I believe they already had the record deal. The record was out, but this is what really, got them more notoriety and got them on tour.
Wow.
And so it's definitely a classic.
I didn't know all that backstory to this cut. That's really cool.
Yeah.
All right. Puts us at my number 2, Closer to the Heart. This is another one that's got a significant amount of radio play. And I don't know that I picked this for any particular reason other than I know that it's a hit. I know that it's there. I think that this one kind of made my list because I know it's essential. But it's also kind of a pop tune. And I recognize that it's not. It doesn't necessarily represent a lot of what Rush is about, but it's one of the ones that I know everyone's heard. So I don't think there's anything that's super notable that we haven't, like for all the elements of Rush that we've talked about in Closer to the Heart, other than this might be the one that they most wrote to maybe be on the radio. Maybe that was like
I don't know. Yeah, it's almost like this just shows almost like a diamond. There's a different facet of what they can do. I don't know that they did anything for the radio, at least at the time. I kind of believe most of what they did just flowed out of who they were and what they were into. And
yeah, but Closer to the Heart's kind of like this weird, like middle of everything for Rush tune, which on the one hand is a little bit vanilla and boring, but on the other hand, it sort of exists in the middle of everything, and maybe that makes it the most representative. I don't know.
Yeah.
I like the tune, but I can't think of like an element to talk about that's like, and then check this part out, because it's like all the things together. So on the one hand, it's kind of a vanilla cut, but because it's kind of a vanilla cut, it kind of showcases a little bit of everything about what Rush is about. So maybe it's the most essential song. I don't know.
Well, and the one thing I would say is that all the parts fit together. It's not like you're trying to cram a square peg into a round hole. It's just like they're like, okay, this is what we're going to do for this song. It's not like they tried to turn it into this, something it shouldn't have been.
Right.
It just fits.
Yeah, it does. So I feel like I'm underselling it, and I don't mean to sound like I'm underselling it, but I just don't have a specific standout element to talk about.
Yeah, it's melodic. It is definitely more radio oriented for them too.
Yeah.
But great song.
Great song.
Nice melody.
So your number 2 is 2112.
Yes. So the epic beginning part is this, I believe it was a mini Moog, and I just texted a friend who plays keyboard in the Rush tribute band, and he said it was a Oberheimer or Ober something, but it was some sort of keyboard that they came up with these crazy sounds. And in 1976, I think it came out.
Sounds about right.
I don't know, maybe I don't even think was Dark Side of the Moon wasn't out, but they still weren't. They were doing sort of similar stuff, but not.
Yeah, I mean,
quite.
yeah, Pink Floyd is certainly more moody.
Yeah.
And less.
But in terms of the keyboard sounds and the
Yeah.
soundscape kind of like swirling, it's like a spaceship. So the album, if you're not familiar
right.
with it, is the year 2112. And there was kind of a theme album. The gist was that there was this interplanetary war, and now instruments and music is no longer supposed to happen. And because there's a song on the album where he finds a guitar and he's tuning it up.
Right.
I forget what it's called, but he's like, what is this strange thing that I've found? And it's a guitar, But anyways, back to the song. This is when Rush, the story that we talked about earlier, was the record company came to him and said, you need to start writing hits because you're writing weird, music that are super long songs. You don't have any hits.
Sure.
And so when this came out, they said, we're going to go out with a bang. And they showed for the first time that a band can have no radio airplay and be supported with record sales and just a huge cult following that was primarily male.
Yeah.
But it worked. And from then on out, the record company said, you have carte blanche. You do whatever you want. Do your thing.
Well, in this 1975 to 1980 little window, we saw a number of records, and maybe my window's not quite accurate, but Me and My Arrow, Harry Nilsson, a lot of the Zappa stuff, where they were like these rock opera albums where they were themed all the way through. It was one giant story.
What about Thick as a Brick by
Yeah.
Jethro Tull? That was one song.
Right, exactly. And then The Wall kind of is it's a little bit more, but I mean, we certainly had these kinds of albums and that style's kind of gone away. Can't think of a more recent album where
I don't see Taylor Swift doing an album like that.
I don't either, but
She could.
she probably could.
Yeah.
A lot of people, she's kind of another one of those polarizing characters in music right now, but I really respect her.
Yeah.
But I'd really like to see the rock opera album come back where, it's kind of Meatloaf kind of did that. Me and My Arrow, Harry Nilsson's one of my.
I don't even know that.
You don't know that one?
No.
Oh, anyway, the Zappa stuff was kind of does. This
I never
story.
make it past about 12 seconds of any Zappa. I know his son is like super good too.
Yeah.
But I just never clicked with Frank Zappa.
That's surprising. As much as you're into
I
this
should
harder
listen
rock,
more,
I
yeah.
think you should give Zappa another
Yeah,
try. I
I
think
will.
you'd appreciate it.
I will.
Especially if you kind of pull out the lyrics.
Okay.
Try to engage with it as a story too.
Okay.
And I think that might suck you in.
Okay.
All right. Anyway, that was number 2 for you, 2112. Did you have more to say about that? Maybe we didn't say enough.
Nope. Just a masterpiece in how it flows into the Temples of Syrinx. To me, it's all one song.
Yeah.
And Getty's range, again, is so up there. And again, a fairly easy riff on Temples of Syrinx, but really great drums on the fills there and just epic. That's
Yeah. All right.
good stuff.
So I don't think anyone's going to be surprised with my number 1. It's Tom Sawyer, one of the most iconic and copied drum break fills ever. It's still very challenging to play, even if you understand what's happening. And that's the first step to this as a drummer, is understanding what Neil's doing. And then once you kind of understand it, to execute it's a whole nother level of musicianship. Because I think that just understanding it means that you understand a lot about music, and then being able to execute's required. And trying to just sit and play something like it without understanding what he's doing and why is a recipe for failure, because it's kind of complicated, especially the brat 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 brat. It's anyway, I don't know how to explain it without doing an entire music lesson about
Right.
it. But all of it's really there. I think that the characterization of the rebel character and relating it to a Tom Sawyer kind of character, lyrically, I think it's super interesting. Musically, it's super interesting, and probably their biggest hit.
Yeah.
And for good reason. This song, I've complained in the past on the show about songs that are overplayed and how they kill it for me. And Tom Sawyer's certainly overplayed, but it doesn't kill me. I will listen to this song and turn it up.
I would
and
agree.
might even hit repeat and listen to it twice because it's not long enough.
Yeah.
You know, it's so good.
I would totally agree. You know, I didn't put it on my top 10, but it has to be in our final top 10 for sure. I grew up in the 80s. Like I said earlier, I working at a gas station with the radio on all the time. This song would come on, you know, every probably 12th to 15th song. It was in heavy rotation.
Yeah.
And just that beginning, da-da-da-da, and the keyboard, I mean, unbelievable. And then, like you say, all the drum parts. And there's actually some really interesting chord voicings in that as well.
Okay.
Great, you know, where the transition into the guitar solo, all of that is just excellent. And it's radio-oriented Rush, but it's still Rush.
Yeah, and this is another one that's got a lot of Geddy Lee jumping between bass guitar and all the synth stuff.
Yeah, he drops off the bass at one point, yeah.
And you know, even on the recording, they didn't cheat. That's another interesting thing about Rush is that they wanted their studio albums to sound like how they knew they had to make the live album sound. So he didn't dub a bass track underneath the synth stuff. He really just lets it drop out, even on the studio version when they could have cheated it to get a more full sound. They wanted it to be representative of what you would hear live.
Right.
And I think that's really interesting.
They nailed it too live. They could do it.
Man.
I mean, you've got so much going on with just the three guys, and then the bass comes back in, and then the guitar solo goes, and it's good stuff.
Yeah, great tune. All right. And then your number one is a crossover. We're going to go back. It's Limelight for your number one. Why is it number one?
Just because, like what you were just talking about, if it came on the radio, I would listen to it. So some of these other songs I wouldn't necessarily put, you know, on my phone to listen to in the truck. But if that came on, it's just such a melodic, classic, epic song. Same with I mean, would be happy calling it a tie with Tom Sawyer.
Yeah, and I'm not going to get any argument from it either. I think Limelight probably not as successful from a radio play point of view, but for personal appreciation, I can't say I like one better than the other.
Do you know a little bit of the story about part of the lyric? He talks about living on the lighted stage, approaches the unreal. But basically, it's Neil Peart toward this. When they got so popular onward, he was really uncomfortable with how popular he was. He wouldn't go to the meet and greets. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but He talks about living in a gilded cage. And that's what this lyric's about, and how he wasn't comfortable. He wouldn't go to the meet and greets, and he really had to put out a statement like, don't take it personal. It's not that I don't appreciate you guys. I just don't like people adoring me.
Yeah.
Which shows a real humble side of him.
Well, good communication, though, to let people understand that, like, don't take this as a lack of appreciation on my part. You know, I don't want to damage, you know, to say, you know, I'm so uncomfortable that I'm afraid that my presence might damage your perception of me. So better to leave it a mystery than for you to walk away disappointed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's saying a lot. And just, you know, and I think his insightfulness just shows through his lyric writing. Mm-hmm. All right, so we've talked about 20-ish tunes minus the crossovers. We're going to negotiate a bit and come back with a final list. All right, and we have a list. So after a quick wrestling match, which I lost, we've decided that the list from number 1 to number 10 is number 1, Tom Sawyer, number 2, Limelight. And we both kind of agreed those could be interchangeable.
Yeah.
Like Limelight could be number 1. It's such a, you know,
signature.
Yeah, either one of those fit. And then we kind of put our crossover. So at number 3, we put Spirit of Radio. And number 4, we put Free Will. And then at number 5, we decided Working Man was really significant because of the impact it had in Cleveland radio and really being the impetus of the band becoming popular to a much wider audience. And I didn't know that story, but it makes it more significant. It's already a great cut, but It's got a significant story behind it. Yeah,
and the lyrics really resonate with, you know, the common people that come home after work and crack a beer and put the ball game on and whatever.
That's great. Number 6, La Villa, God, how do you say it? Strangigato, which is sort of like one of these other, this is, you know, how long is this cut? Like 9?
At least.
Yeah, it's one of these sort of prog rock epic things. And because they did that, Don feels that this is sort of the best representation of that long rock epic. And I agree. Number 7, we put Natural Science. Number 8, 2112. Number 9, Closer to the Heart. And we went back and kind of we thought about, the possible vanilla-ish of it, but it's in its sort of nothing. It's weird because nothing like stands out about it to me. Like the guitar solo isn't especially poignant, the lyrics aren't especially meaningful, but man, it just does everything Rush does in such a clean way that I guess I would say that if there's one song, if it came down to one song, I'd probably say listen to Closer to the Heart.
Yeah, and this is the song in the concert that brings the 2 females into the show. It's a joke. It's a joke.
The 2 audience members. I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. And that's another interesting thing about this band is their gender demographic is very skewed.
I think it's expanded of the last 15, 20 years, but did you ever see the movie I Love You Man with Paul Rudd?
Yeah.
There's that scene. Well, they actually do an offshoot skit where the guys in Rush are coming down the hall and Paul Rudd and Jason, whatever his name is, they were in their dressing room eating their food.
Right.
And Rush walks in and they go, "Did you see there were 3 girls there tonight?" And they're making fun of themselves.
Yeah. That's a good cameo. That's a good movie. I forgot about that one. Yeah. So number 9, Close to the Heart. And then at number 10, we let my guilty pleasure sneak on at YYZ.
Oh, yeah.
And we feel this is a really good intro. But Rush is a band that I think you can really dig into almost anything and find a deep appreciation. And the genre of music that it is, kind of being a prog rock band, I think the lyrics are surprisingly meaningful. I think this is a band that you can sit and listen and rock out and appreciate all the musicianship, but you can also sit down with a glass of wine and read along the lyrics and get a whole different appreciation for this band, and a surprising appreciation.
For sure, yeah. Neil Peart was a very cerebral guy and very, read a lot, and, he put a lot into it. Some of it's more poetic, some of it has deeper meaning, but it definitely makes you think.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Don, I really appreciate you coming by on this very hot afternoon and knocking this out with me. What Zero Gravity shows you guys got coming up? Because that episode will come out Wednesday. So tell me about what you got coming up.
We're going to play down at what used to be Saddle Creek. I still call it Saddle Creek Golf Club. They do a Wednesday night concert series, so that's coming up this Wednesday.
That's the one in Angels or Copper?
Copper.
That's Copper, okay.
Yeah, and they treat us really well. It's a great place to play. You guys should go there sometime.
Okay.
And then we've got the Coffle Park second Saturday in August.
Fantastic.
Which hopefully this heat wave's done by then. The last second Saturday they canceled.
Yeah, it was too darn hot.
Yeah, so
that'll be second Saturday of August.
And then we're at the Lube Room on the Friday of Labor Day weekend. That's up in Dorrington.
Cool. Yeah, so up above Arnold, California, on Highway 4.
Really cool venue. We like that.
Cool, man. Well, it sounds like you guys got some great gigs lined up. Yep. And say hi to Carrie and Lauren and Dan for me.
Will do.
And we'll catch you next time.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks, man.
You bet.
If you're interested in seeing me perform live, I'll be playing with Grover Anderson and the Lampaliers Friday, July 26th at Stephen O's Tasting Room over in Vallecito. The show starts at 7 p.m., and I'll also be joined by past guest Marshall Henry. Hope to see you there. Thank you.
I almost forgot about the time we saw Old Faithful, and we laughed about the sign that showed a person burning up. What I'd give to take another drive across Montana, sing my songs for real cowboys selling CDs from the trunk. We've got fewer options now, there's so much more to do. Back then all we needed was time enough to make a life worth living. Let distractions stay distractions. Temptation can be taxing, don't you give it all your time. Go swimming in the lakes and in the rivers with lovers, friends, and sinners in sunlight and moonshine. Live in the city. You don't have to stay forever, but you'll learn and you'll live better knowing how to share your space. And if nothing else will help, Walking in the woods goes a long way. 7 miles from town to home means 7 miles for singing. And that's at least 4 songs if I can keep trucking third. Listening to the chorus in the backseat gives me shivers. May our spirits stay freewheeling as our grasp upon the words in a life worth living. Let distractions stay distractions. Temptation can be taxing. Don't you give it all your time. Go swimming in the lakes and in the rivers with lovers, friends, and sinners in sunlight and moonshine. Live in the city. You don't have to stay forever, but you'll learn and you'll live better knowing how to share your space. And if nothing else will help, walking in the woods goes a long way. Try to keep your mistakes inconsequential. Let your heart be broken once or twice. Don't ignore your regrets, but don't weep at lost potential. And if you let somebody share your life, make a life worth living. Let distractions stay distractions. Temptation can be taxing. Don't you give it all your time. Go swimming in the lakes and in the rivers with lovers, friends, and sinners in sunlight and moonshine. Live in the city.